Okay, looks like we might be live. I think there's a few people here already. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Just checking. Skip's here. Awesome. Jimmy's here. Pete Block's here. Awesome. Vincent. Have emails been going up? Yeah, there was an email that went out this morning. Had one other person over the weekend who said something about they didn't get last week's email, and then they messaged today and didn't get one today either. So Charles is here. We're doing well. All right, Troy's here. Excellent. We're starting to build a little crowd again. So welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight is a bit of a sticky subject. We're going to talk about hammer veneering. Yeah, I know. Very punny. Got you. So just making sure you guys in the chat can actually see and hear me before I jump into this thing. Oh, there we go. Sound and video is great. Well, who knows? Troy says he didn't see an email either. Well, we'll have to look at that because they did go out this morning at around 9:30, I believe, is when it was scheduled for. Hopefully you guys got the one last week, letting you know that we didn't do it last week. You know. So a little bit of a good. Douglas says he can see and hear fine. That's much better than the video is great. We haven't even started yet. All right, so let's get. I guess let's get right to it. Looks like I said we've got a bit of a crowd already building, and we'll go from there. So hammer veneering. Like I said in the email that some of you didn't obviously get. If you're wanting to kick up your projects a little bit and you end up with a little bit of figured veneer and you want to try and put it down there, but you've never really done veneer before, so you're not necessarily going to run right out and buy a vacuum press or any of that kind of stuff, or even a manual veneer press or something. How do you do it? How do you get that stuff put down onto whatever substrate you want to put it on? And you know, the substrates can be just about anything you want. I mean, you can do, I've got some Baltic birch plywood here. My favorite is to do it just on some quarter or riffs on mahogany, because mahogany is very stable. You could also do it on MDF because it's also very stable. Not my favorite because I don't really know how you do the joinery on anything you're actually assembling with MDF other than sort of butt joints and screws, and even then it doesn't really hold very well. So, but theoretically you could do hammer veneering or putting veneer on just about any kind of a relatively stable substrate. I say relatively stable because if you look at 18th century stuff, quite often it was just stuck on a white pine backer or something fairly soft. Quite often it was either brick laid or stack laminated, those kinds of things. So you're not really, I mean, it's not really a very stable substrate on those things. So if you want your stuff to last, you're going to go with something a little bit more stable, which also means it's probably going to be a little more expensive than just cutting up a bunch of white pine and gluing it together either as little bricks of pine and then cutting your shape out of it, or stack laminating layers and then cutting through that. So again, I've got some Baltic birch plywood here. I've got some of the basic tools here that I also use for joining the veneers together. And not that I really want to spend a bunch of time talking about that as much as I do about tips and techniques for the actual veneer work, laying it down. I don't want to spend time on how to join the veneers and do all that kind of stuff. Believe it or not, I think that's a topic for another show, because, we could do this. We could talk about how to joint things and book match things and all of that kind of stuff, and probably take up enough for 2 or 3 Tuesday tips easily. There's that much to learn. Just checking the. Okay. Lots of people saying they did and didn't get it. Oh, Mike's here. Awesome. Just checking on me. Am I okay, Mike? So, we're doing well. So we've got, I've got the other thing I've got going on here, is I've got so let's get back on track here. So I've got the basics of stuff here. I've got my veneer saw here, or an X-Acto knife. My straight edge I forgot to put up on the bench. I got a cutting mat, that kind of stuff. So if I want to cut some things, and I figured at some point here, if I'm trying to do things, trying to join things, who knows, maybe I'll get in the mood to show you. I've got, like I said, I've got some veneer tape here to join. I'm going to actually sort of tape these 2 pieces of veneer together. I've got 3 different types of veneer: walnut, maple, and cherry. And I've got some rollers for laying down the veneer tape. What I've got over here on the side is actually a wax warmer. If you're unsure what that is, ask your wife. It's probably fairly familiar to her. You can get them fairly cheap. I kept trying to remember how much I paid for this one, 30 or 40 bucks maybe, off of Amazon. It's basically 2 double boilers. They have a little pot in each side here that I fill with water, and they have thermostat controls on the front here. Oops, just fell down into the dog holes there with the feet. So I can dial it up. This one's in Celsius. Who knows if you can find. I just bought one that was a double container, and I can dial it up. So the big thing with the hide glue, which is what you're going to use when you're doing hammer veneer, you're not going to hammer veneer with PVA glue or anything like that. You're going to hammer veneer with hot hide glue, and you have to make sure that you don't go too hot on the material. So if you get a whole lot over about 140, 150 degrees, the proteins in the glue start to break down, and it just doesn't really function anymore. It certainly weakens the joint depending on how close to that 140. I usually stick right around 140 degrees. So that's somewhere around 60 degrees Celsius, give or take. In the one pot, I've got a jar full of hide glue, which I made from crystals, the ground hide glue. And I guess I should have brought some on camera, but I mix it a little differently. Usually the directions that come with the ground crystals are mix it 1 part glue, 1 part water. And for hammer veneering, I like to do 1 part glue, 2 parts water. If I'm doing regular joinery, it might be just a little more. The great thing about liquid or about hot hide glue is you can really thin it down fairly far and it'll still hold. I find that when I mix it 1-to-1, everything is too thick and gloppy. So I tend to thin it out a little more. I like the fact that I can spread it. And that said, because it's a little thinner, I have a little less working time because it absorbs into the wood and flashes off the combination of those two things pretty rapidly. In the other glue pot, I've got a hammer, a veneer hammer. And that was the other thing I went looking for today and couldn't find. This one's a commercially available one. I can switch the cameras there and you can see it. I believe, I'm trying to remember. Oh, Keith's here. Awesome. I'm going to switch the camera up just a bit there. Yeah, now you can see it. This one's 2 cherries. The head is nice and warm at the moment because it was soaking for the last couple of hours in that hot water bath. I'm trying to remember where I got this. It might have been Tools for Working Wood or one of those, maybe Highland Woodworking even. I don't remember. I've had it that long. So what I do is I take this and I put the one side of the glue pot here at slightly less than 140 degrees. So it's running around 50 degrees Celsius. And I just put the head right into some water there because that's going to keep it's going to keep the hammer kind of warm. And when I start to, it's not a hammer, a striking hammer. This is more of a squeegee than anything. So I'm going to paint up the substrate and my veneer, and then I'm going to use the warm veneer hammer basically to squeegee the glue out of this thing to the point where not only is there creating a little bit of a vacuum there, but the layer of glue becomes so thin that it just sort of triggers off and tacks up pretty quickly. I think that's about it for the description of what I have here before me. Like I said, I've already prepped a few pieces of veneer. I have some extras in case I really screw something up and need a new piece for here. Hopefully that doesn't happen. So, and it kind of goes without saying that whether you're doing something that's just straight grained, some chalk on there. I'll put that side up. A little bit of tape on that side, leftover veneer. Or something that's highly figured, whether it's something that's curly or something that has crotch or burl figure. Those kinds of things, you want to make sure that you've relaxed the veneer a little bit. I do that with a spray bottle that has a couple of tablespoons of glycerin mixed in with the water. I know there's some people that water down glue and put it in there too. I've heard people using PVA glue for that. My problem there is I can't get past the idea that PVA glue and high glue don't really play well together. So I'm not sure why I would mix in PVA glue into my relaxer. And then for me, like I said, it might be a tablespoon or 2 of glycerin in a quart bottle that I'm using as a spray bottle. I'll put it on there, spray it on both sides of my veneer, and then I'll put the veneer between 2 pieces of plywood or MDF with sheets of newsprint on either side of it. If I can't use newsprint, I'll use some paper towels and throw a little extra moisture on there, because the idea is I want that glycerin and water to get in there and just soften up those fibers enough that on the highly figured stuff, at the very least, I mean, I do it with everything, but I want it to lay perfectly flat, and I want those fibers to soak that stuff up so that as I'm working it, it's not going to crack and move and split and tear on me. So that's the basics. In under 15 minutes, we might actually finish on time tonight. basics of hammer veneering are pretty simple. I found that as long as I keep the hammer warm, that stops things from fetching up too quickly. It helps you squeegee the glue out there so that you don't get big lumps and bumps everywhere. You have to have enough glue on here that it'll definitely grab. You're not going to run short because we're going to coat 3 different surfaces here. So I'm going to switch cameras again, get in there, and let's do a little in case we're kind of... All right, so you can see I've got a piece of cherry veneer here. And I'm going to just kind of stick it down to this substrate right here. I want to make sure there's no dust or dirt on my veneer or on my substrate. So I'm starting with the underside of my veneer facing up. I've got I'm going to bring my glue pot over. And again, I've got just a little mason jar in there with my high glue. Yeah, off camera. Awesome. So I'll put it out here. Try and get this over there on the cutting mat so it doesn't get all wet. All right, so little mason jar with my glue in there. Inside the glue pot, clearly is a bunch of water and my brushes, obviously. So what I'm going to do is drain out my brush here. I want you to be able to see it, and I want the glue close enough that I can work it pretty quickly. So I'm going to dip in, and unlike what I showed you guys before with brushing shellac and finish, I really want to load this up. So I'm going to load up my veneer, and you're going to see that it's going to start to curl pretty quickly because I'm introducing moisture to only one side of this at the moment. But that will not be the case here in the end. So I want to make sure I cover everything with a nice layer of glue. Get my substrate glued up. Again, just plywood, and we'll talk about this a little more as I go. Because you guys are going to sit here and say, well, don't you have to treat it equally on both sides? I'll wait. Somebody will say that in the chat. All right, get the stuff out of there. Lay my veneer right on top there. Wet that. Then we're going to wet this side. So not only does this balance the glue on both sides of this thing. Oh, I have a crack there. Lovely. But the glue will actually act kind of like a lubricant for all of this. I'm going to leave that in the glue, put the glue pot back in I'm going to grab my hammer, dry it off, because it's nice and warm, as I said. And what I want to do, now sometimes I'll have my veneer tacked down if I have some extra room here. And what I want to do is, I'm not really doing anything beyond the weight of the hammer, and I'm just going back and forth with the grain and kind of squeegeeing that glue right out of there. That actually went down pretty quick and easy. So clean off the hammer and back into the water bath. See that? Super fast. The cool thing about hammer veneering is you don't have to necessarily do flat surfaces. You can do curved surfaces as well. And what we're trying to do is work it enough, like I said, that I'm going to take that hammer on there more. I can still see a lot of glue puddled up on the top of this thing. I think when I did the clamping tips here, I don't think I talked about you not being able to starve the joint. That's not necessarily the case here. If I work this, overwork this surface and really squeeze the glue out here, I can actually cause this thing to start to buckle because I'll have pushed so much glue out that the moisture is going to keep expanding the veneer and it'll just kind of buckle. So I'm just kind of watching what's going on here to make sure that I'm still pretty flat. And the cool thing about the hide glue is because it's a protein-based glue, when I add color and finish to this, it's going to absorb it. It's not going, this isn't going to seriously modify the color really at all. So if I slide that over, the next thing I wanted to show you was I already have these two edges kind of joined for the maple and the walnut. And what I want to do, I've just got a wet rag sitting in a bowl here. I'm going to get some fresh. So the first thing I'm going to do with my veneer tape is wet the end and then fold it over on itself, because this way I can pull on it without everything sticking to me. All right. So all I wetted was the very end, fold it over, give myself a little pull tab, and now I'll lay it down and pull it across once or twice. And what I want to do is kind of lay it down on the one side. Oop, pull, but not that hard. Real woodworking, folks, not edited for your viewing pleasure. That's what I was saying this past weekend. I was doing demos all weekend for the Long Island woodworkers, as Leo will attest. All right, once or twice across here. I believe the glue on the veneer tape, at least it used to be fish glue, and I'm sure that's probably what it still is. Right, so I've taped across there, and you saw what I did was I stuck it on the maple side, and then I pulled nice and tight, pulled my veneer together to get my joint nice and tight there. We want this on the top side. You don't want it on the bottom side. If you guys know anything about doing split turnings, the big thing is you put paper in between your parts there so that you can easily split the turning apart into multiple pieces. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to cover the joint and then roll that veneer tape nice and flat. Now I'll flip it over and we'll go through the whole process again. Can you use okay, can you Brian says my presentations were very well received. Yes, thank you. And Dave wants to know, can you use blue tape versus veneer tape? I'm not a huge fan of it. We've done it a few times here in the shop without too much trouble. But we used it when we were putting material down using the vacuum press. So it goes in, sits overnight in the vacuum press, and then comes out of there, and you're immediately trying to peel that blue tape off because we don't want it to become a permanent fixture. The great thing about the veneer tape is the tape itself is easily scraped or sanded off. The fish glue really breaks down pretty rapidly. Sometimes you can even do it once this stuff's good and dry. You can take and just go over it lightly with a wet rag or a sponge, and then just sort of peel it off, particularly on those areas where I had it looped over. So now I can really just sort of pull it. All right, so I've got my veneer flipped over here. I'm going to put a good heavy coat of glue everywhere on this thing. And you can see, like I said, it curls up immediately because I'm introducing moisture to one side there. And now I'll go back, hit my substrate. I do have another jar of glue just in case I ran out here, but hopefully I don't need it. You know, this is a pretty easy process. You know, and the thing is, it worked for centuries before they came up with the idea of vacuum presses and all of that kind of stuff. The German fellow who taught me, Werner, actually did his apprenticeship in 2 different shops in Germany. Oh, I just put that back in the water. Oh well. My glue will be a little wetter on the flip side here. All right, let's get it down because it's curling pretty badly. Anyway, one of the places he apprenticed was a marquetry shop. And whenever we would discuss how to put the veneer down, I told you about when I first started, I wanted to clean off any of the dust and dirt. He was so adamant about having an absolutely clean surface. They wouldn't even work in the shop. They went into a clean room to do their glue ups, and he used to say that, you know, it was warm in the room, that you were laying the veneer up, and you weren't allowed to sweat because the sweat off your brow would leave flaws in the veneer. But, you know, he's German. Right? Now, I just went the wrong way on that. So if I'm putting this down and I'm hammering and I notice that my joint is coming slightly apart, I can go at a slight angle and start to draw that veneer in and squeeze that joint really tight. So far, so good. I know it looks like I'm really working this, but I put an awful lot of glue on here. And I'm also seeing slight bubbles. I'm not sure if it's coming up on camera or not, but I don't know if you guys can see the veneer flexing underneath my finger there, but I've got some bubbles on that walnut veneer. And all I want to do is keep working it until this veneer fetches up, or the glue fetches up and really kind of makes things stick. So I'm working it back and forth. I'm not it's almost just the weight of the hammer here going back and forth on this. One of the tools and you know, having a commercial hammer is nice. One of the things, I think I started this early on, I was going to talk about the fact that for years I used a shop-made hammer and I couldn't find it. So it must be packed away with a bunch of old tools somewhere. So if I find it, here in the next few weeks, I will show you at the beginning of one of these Tuesday tips. If I don't, I have more heads. I just need to put the brass rub strip in there. And we'll talk, once I get this down, if I can get it to stick. I have one little bubble that keeps showing up right there. And that's usually why they call it a hammer, because you get so frustrated at some point, you just start beating this thing. Everything else is stuck nicely. So here's the deal. The great thing about hide glue is it's remeltable. So if I have trouble and I come back tomorrow and somewhere this thing is started to bubble up, now there it goes, it's down. Awesome. I can always take, hammer starting to cool off. So back in the bath. All right, actually, I'll clean that off. And while I've got you on the close-up camera, we'll talk about this a little bit. You should be able to see kind of in profile here. It's a steel head on this thing. I've never weighed the thing to find out how much it weighs, but I mean, it's got to be a solid pound of steel here for this top. And the edge here is a full half round. It's about, 3/16 maybe thick, and rounded over fully so that there's no sharp edges. And the whole purpose here, as I said, is to be able to slide it easily over the veneer and squeegee out that glue to the point where it gets thin enough and it cools off and can stick. Hide glue has a really, for everyone out there that doesn't know, hide glue has a really quick tack time, but it has a really slow set time. So, I mean, we started this, 10, 15 minutes ago. The cherry's been veneered down, but if I just start working it, I could actually peel that whole piece up because that glue's not even remotely set. Okay, it's just tacky everywhere. I still got that one spot that's giving me trouble on the walnut. But here's the deal. If it's not working, I come back tomorrow and I get a bubble. There are multiple things that I can do. I just had this veneer hammer back in the water bath for 15, 20 seconds, and it got hot enough, and now my veneer just sticks down again, right? Because I just remelted the glue, and all I'm trying to do at this point is thin it out enough that when I lift the hammer up, it tacks. All right, wipe my glue. Back in the water bath. All right, let's switch. What's the skinny on grain direction as between substrate and the veneer? I'm glad you asked that, Vincent, because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So depending on what I'm using as my substrate, here I've got Baltic birch plywood, and my face veneers are running in the same direction as the veneers that I'm adding to the face of the plywood. So theoretically, I've put a double layer on this way, which should create a minor imbalance. So probably the best thing to do would be to throw a backer veneer across the inside. That said, well, let's talk a little bit about, I got a buckle right at that joint. I pulled it too much. All right. So all of that said, lots of pieces. So if I'm doing cross grain, so if I'm going to use the plywood as my substrate, and I want the grain running perpendicular to my face for whatever reason. At that point, I really have to add a cross grain backer to the inside of this piece. So if I were to go cross grain this way, if I had the grain running this way in my veneers, I would then have to run a backer veneer here with the grain running this way. Because at that point, I'm seriously creating, I've essentially created, instead of 9 plies, I have 10. And they're, when the plies are perpendicular to one another, they have to remain balanced in order to not sort of twist up like a Pringle. I think I mentioned that before. I need a drink here. So not only if I'm doing that on a piece of plywood, if I'm veneering, say I'm doing drawer fronts and I'm using my quarter sawn or rift sawn mahogany, obviously I'm going to run my drawer front material horizontally relative to the case itself, you know, this way. And for the most part, because I run my veneers with the grain running in the same direction, say I want to put a mahogany crotch on something or a walnut crotch on something, and I'm going to use that rift or quarter sawn mahogany as my backer, but my grain is running left to right. I don't necessarily have to put a backer on the inside. Lots and lots and lots of period pieces are just flat sawn white pine with a veneer on the front and nothing on the backside whatsoever. So if you're worried that that might cause a moisture imbalance and things will start to bow or whatever, you can certainly add another veneer to the inside. It will keep it more balanced. Certainly if you're going cross grain. So if I was gonna, I don't know if you guys saw the issue of fine woodworking, where my article came out on the bent cock beating that goes on the piece on the cover was Bob Van Dyke's high chest that we made in the class at his place. And he did a great job on there. And his drawer fronts, the backer material ran left to right, but the crotches were all book matched running vertically. So he had to put a backer on the inside to balance what was going on the outside, because the expansion and contraction was in opposition to one another. If he didn't, things would start to really move. He used stack laminated. They took white pine and ripped it and reoriented the annual growth rings so that it was pretty much quarter sawn. In the end, I don't think he would have had a problem. Everyone else in the class used maple burl, which doesn't have a singular grain direction to it, because it's just, burls are just fibers that twist and turn in every possible direction. And they only veneered them on the face. And they should not be moving and warping and twisting all over, because, well, it's quarter sawn at that point. Like I said, they took white pine, reoriented it, flat sawn white pine, ripped it into strips and reoriented it so that it was quarter sawn with the grain running this way. And so one side was fine. If somebody was desperately worried because they read something in a magazine that said you have to treat both sides equally, completely different topic, then they could have easily thrown a single straight grain veneer on the backside to balance that out. Hopefully that made sense. And Brian wants, do you think that the wood was old growth with tighter grain, that they only veneered one side because the wood moved less? Nope. the wood moved, the wood moves, the wood moves, the wood moves. I don't think it necessarily moves less because there are more annual growth rings. If anything, I would think that would move more. The reality is it's more about trying to keep things balanced. Like I said, these are veneered on my tool cabinet. When I brought in the material, this is all English walnut, and when I brought in the material, I had a whole bunch of cutoffs that were in the rough to do the drawer fronts, and one of them was all of this figure. And I said, that's too nice to have one drawer figured that way. So what I did was I took the remaining chunks that I had of it was just flats on English walnut. It was not as curly and figured as this. And I cut my drawer fronts the size, and what I did was I glued it to either side of that thick curly board, and then resawed it off after it dried, milled the piece down, and then glued 2 more drawer fronts on there so that I would get the book and butt match you see here. So I was opening it up this way and opening it up that way. Again, takes proper planning and not the kind of thing that you're just going to glue it up, put it apart, pull it apart, and go, oh, that kind of worked out. So you got to really sort of plan your veneer work. And again, that's something that we can talk about on a Tuesday night, just for laying out those kinds of veneers at some point. Everything seems to be down here. So again, I used good fresh glue. I made up the glue early this morning. When I first got into the shop, if I would have done, I could have done it last night, but I'd gotten back from Long Island on Sunday, and yesterday was sort of, run around and take care of some things around here and kind of not spend my day beating myself up in the shop. So, and then I had a class today, so we were working all day. So I made up the glue early this morning, let it sort of cook and melt all day. So it was good and dissolved, even though it was only made this morning. So again, if I come back to my veneers and I come in tomorrow and I'm not going to, but if I had a couple of bubbles, that one spot that kept giving me trouble here is down perfectly now. But let's say I had a couple of bubbles in there, either large or small, either out towards the edges or something into the middle of my veneer. I've got a couple of different ways that I can handle that. First thing I can do is take a flat iron, a clothes iron, put it onto a relatively low setting, and try and iron it to reliquefy the glue that's under there, and hopefully do the same thing I did with the hammer, which is sort of squeegee it a little bit, get that glue sort of liquid again until it grabs. The other thing I could do is I could take an X-Acto knife and slit the bubble and then fill a syringe with high glue and inject it in there and then clamp it. Sometimes when we do this, they don't stick like this right from the get-go. A lot of it depends on the day. It's been sunny and dry here for numerous days. Going to be kind of humid. We're supposed to get rain, I think, tomorrow night into Wednesday, into Thursday, Wednesday, tomorrow. So if it's more humid, if it's a little cooler in your shop, things may not sort of stick the way you want when you're hammering. There is absolutely nothing wrong with taking what I've done here, throwing down a sheet of wax paper, and then putting a piece on top of it and then clamping it to the bench to give it a little press. You don't need a whole lot of fancy tools. If you have a vacuum bag, you could certainly throw a caul on top of this and shove it into a vacuum bag overnight. I'm not a huge fan of water-based glues inside of the vacuum bag, because in the vacuum there's no place for the moisture to go except for into the board, and there's, it also lowers the boiling point of water. So, you got a couple of weird things happening there. So I tend not to, if I'm hammer veneering, I tend not to add it to the into an airbag, a vacuum bag, but I will almost always throw on some wax paper and then throw another. Like if I was doing a whole bunch of drawer fronts, I'd start to clamp the drawer fronts together, because it can't hurt, as long as you're covering it, because it's glue on the face. So if I stick this to another piece, come back tomorrow without anything separating them, I'm just going to have two drawer fronts that are glued together. So don't do that. All right, let's check some more questions. Mike, Barry, did you ever use lumber core as a substrate? Wait a minute. Pete says the article was great. Thank you, Pete. And Barry wants to know, did I ever use lumber core as a substrate? Is it worth going to the trouble of essentially making your own plywood? Yeah, I've done it once or twice. It's a lot of work, but I've also made my own veneer core plywood, which is significantly less work than doing lumber core. The great thing about making your own plywood is you have control over what's happening on the interior of that thing. So to make your own lumber core plywood, I wouldn't even attempt it if I didn't have a vacuum bag. And Werner used to talk about it all the time. They would make but in Europe, they tend to, they use, like when I went over to Germany to look at shops after vocational school, they all had veneer presses, and absolutely, they did hardly anything out of solid lumber. It was almost all veneer with solid wood caps. So when they were making their lumber core plywood up, if they were going to cut it out, they knew they had the patterns laid out so that they could do the edging in a proper way internally in the plywood, so that once they had everything veneered, they could cut this out and they would have a solid moldable edge along the whole length of their part. So is it worth it? It's certainly better than, it's going to be a lot more stable than using solid wood for some things. One of the pieces early on that I remember doing something like that with is I had made a game table with a flippable top for a client when I worked at Irian, and it had a walnut crotch as the top, and we milled, the design. They wanted me to copy a very specific Irish game table, and drew it out. Louis Irian had a nice one-piece walnut crotch for the top, put it together and had it on the piece. It had some molding around the edges, and I tried to do it on both sides to keep everything balanced. And within 3 weeks of the thing getting finished on it, the top was twisted and bowed in like 14 different directions. So brought it back, removed the moldings, resawed the crotch down the middle, thinned it down, and then made up the core. And then I made a whole new molding that included the bull nose that was on the original crotch as a one-piece molding that we dadoed out. I dadoed it out, and it was essentially a frame, a mitered frame with a floating panel in the middle. And that thing has stayed dead flat for, it's now 25 or 30 years. So you can control a lot more when you make your own plywood. that said, it's kind of tedious. So if you're, I know you guys are doing this as, an avocation, so time is irrelevant. But if that's how you want to spend your time, knock yourself out. Let's see. Next one. Mike wants to know if my hammer rusts in the water bath. Nope, not so far. Oh, and that's the thing. When I made the shop made one is a wooden head, so it's not super heavy. Don't put it into the water bath because it'll just swell up. And the strip, what I use for the edges, I got some from McMaster Car. I got some brass strips that were about 1/8 of an inch thick or so, maybe 3/4 of an inch wide, and then I ran a groove through the head material, set it down in there, and I rounded it. I took a file and just rounded over the. So there, to keep it warm, I'll do this without the water, and I'll just set it into the pot so that it warms up the brass a little bit. I have it epoxied into the head, so I mean I've never had a problem with it, but I don't think I'd submerge the wooden head. It also doesn't weigh anywhere near what the metal hammer weighs. That's about all I can tell you about that. So no, I haven't had any problems with it, and I dry it off. I don't let it sit in there for days on end. Troy wants to know, do you worry about planing a drawer front for fitting after veneering? Not usually. Not usually. I mean, I try and get my drawer fronts relatively close to the final fit. And the whole deal here is usually if I'm going to veneer a drawer front, there's either we turn it into a lip drawer where we're cutting through the veneer anyway to create the lip, in which case you're not planing the drawer front to fit, you're planing the edge of the rabbet to make it fit into the opening. Or in the case of most of the William & Mary stuff, they've got some kind of an edge band that runs around there that's thicker, and the whole purpose is to protect that veneer face. It's kind of like the article where I said about the bent cock beating. The whole purpose was to protect the veneer from getting damaged through normal use. Oh, John Walters made it, right? Peter said, what are good sources of high glue? Certainly not Home Depot. Yeah, if you can find it at Home Depot, you ought to buy it all, because it'll be, we call those a unicorn. No, they don't buy anything there. I think the last stuff I bought was from Tools for Working Wood. They sell it. If you look online, there's a couple of other people that sell it. I always used to get it from Woodcraft. I would buy the Mohawk or Balin's. Mohawk bought Balin's probably 30 or 40 years ago at this point. And it would come in a 1 pound can. And that was the stuff I like to use the most. I don't know what the gram strength was, because we didn't even talk about gram strength until sometime in the last 10 years. This stuff, I believe, is... Let me go off camera a second and I'll grab the bags, because they're over here on the bench. So I wanted something a little thicker for the hammer veneering tonight. This was the stuff I got relatively recently from Tools for Working Wood, and I used the 251 gram strength because color-wise and texture-wise, and when I mixed it up, viscosity-wise, it was very similar to the stuff that I would buy at Woodcraft, but that may just be because I thinned it out similarly. The 192 that I have, they say, is for marquetry, so you would think that 192 would also work pretty well for sticking down veneer with high glue. Edward wants to know, where can I buy a great hammer veneer, a veneer hammer? Um, oh, Frank says Don Williams also sells high glue. I knew he sold shellac, but I wasn't aware that he was selling high glue too. There's honestly, there can't be that many manufacturers of this stuff left around. So my guess is a lot of it's coming from the same place. Again, I don't, I'm not sure. They come in these vacuum sealed bags. These are both opened at this point, but in the granule form, I have a 5-pound bag of Mohawk stuff that Bob Van Dyke got, and he had trouble with his. He'd gotten like 3 bags somewhere, so 15 pounds worth, and he said it was causing him trouble. It wasn't dissolving properly, but I've used some of it out of the 5-pound bag I have, and I've had absolutely zero trouble with it. I went tonight with this just because this was the first stuff I saw this morning when I came over around 5:30 this morning. I was barely awake and went, okay, hey, that looks good. You should use that. So a good place to buy a veneer hammer. Again, I'm gonna go to Joel. Go to Tools for Working Wood. They probably, like I said, I think that's where I got this one. It's Two Cherries. Is the manufacturer. They probably, I mean, if you Google or whatever search engine you like, Two Cherries veneer hammer, somebody's going to come up with it. There used to be a place in Texas that sold a lot of the Two Cherries stuff, but I seem to remember him going out of business just before COVID, but I could be wrong. And Vincent wants to know, is there a best thickness for the veneer for hammering veneer? Well, a lot of the stuff in the 18th century was put down with it was almost all done with a hammer. And yeah, Brian says Highland Woodworking sells the hammer. That probably was where I got it. If Joel doesn't sell it, Chris sells it down at Highland. So thickness. Almost all the 18th century stuff was hammered, and some of those veneers are 1/8 inch or more. So the answer is no. It works for no matter what you do. Hammer veneering, it's an easy process. Like I said, you don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money on a hammer. Maybe at some point here in the next few weeks, I'll squeeze in making one, so that we used to do it in I would teach a class on like basic veneering, where we would come in and I would show you how to cut the stuff. We would book match some stuff. We would do some hammer veneering. We do a tiny little bit of simple edge banding. Pardon me. And then we would make up some line and bury inlay tools and run through a little bit of how to do that too. It was a really great class. I don't know why I haven't run one of those in a while. I had to think about adding that to the mix for this year. And the idea is, you get a good broad sense of things, and you go home with some shop made tools, including a veneer hammer, so that you don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money on it. I don't remember what this cost. It wasn't inexpensive, but it wasn't like $500 either. So Troy says Woodcraft for hide. That's where I used to get it. The Woodcraft store here in Allentown. I haven't seen it down there in a long time, and I haven't been able to find it on Woodcraft's website. And I would think that, when I was being up at Bob's, if Bob Van Dyke's in Connecticut, since his school is attached to the woodcraft store in Manchester in the back. If they were selling it at Woodcraft, he wouldn't have been poking around trying to find a source for it. So, which is where he came up with the 15 pounds of Mohawk stuff, which is the same. It was what was being sold at Woodcraft initially was, like I said, it was listed as Balin's, but Mohawk has owned Balin's almost as long as I've been in this business. Brian wants to know where I got my double burner. That's what happens when you show up late, monks. This I got off of Amazon, and it's a wax warmer. And I know you're into waxing your legs because you were running around in those shorts all weekend at the Long Island Woodworkers, and they were smooth. I could tell. So Amazon, it wasn't all that much money, 30, 40 bucks, something like that. And it's a double wax warmer. The great thing is it does maintain a pretty good level of heat, and it's inexpensive. I have a hold heat glue pot, but I'm not even sure those guys are even in business anymore. And considerably more expensive. I mean, even 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I bought those hold heat glue pots, I believe they were 150 or 200 bucks. So if they're still in business, I can't imagine they're any cheaper. And the only thing that I regret not doing was buying the copper sleeve. I have an aluminum sleeve, and it promotes the mold growth on the hide glue pretty quickly. Because we used to have 2 glue pots going in the shop every day, because there was a point where me and the guys that work for me, we had nothing. We used no glue except for hot hide glue to put things together. So Keith says, if I want to slice my own veneer at about a 1/16, how should I glue it down? Not with a hammer, right? Wrong. 16th inch veneer is awesome to hide glue, to hammer veneer. You're fine with that. You might have a little bit, you might really need to put that extra caul over top of it and throw a few clamps on it overnight, because once that veneer starts to move, it's going to move, because it's a whole lot stronger than that glue. But the reality is, like I said, everything in the 18th century was hammer veneered for the most part. And you could, clamps were super expensive. So at most, they would have had metal plates that they kept in an oven. They got this done, and they would just drop a metal plate on it and let it sit overnight until everything cooled and was flat. So that's what I would think. Something heavy, something flat. Lay it on top. Like I said, for me, I always put a layer of wax paper down. It's cheap. Throw it on there. It'll just stop whatever you're putting on top of there from sticking. If I'm going to do a whole bunch of drawer fronts, we used to have a water cooler in the shop, so it was great because we'd always have 3 or 4 or 5 gallon bottles. So I could put all my drawer fronts on a bench, throw down wax paper over the whole thing, throw a piece of plywood on top of it, and then throw 4 or 5 water bottles on top of there, take off for the night, come back the next day. Everything was dead flat. So Keith, I was asking in part for this reason. I would think it would tear. I'm not sure I know did I miss a question? Oh, okay, I got it. Buy an old crock pot at a flea market. That works too for your to keep your glue warm. And Vincent says, Chuck, this thickness issue matters because some makers on videos beat the heck out of the veneer. Well, there you go. Don't, especially with new commercial veneers at 1/40th of an inch, you can't really, you got to be gentle. You got to pretend it's a beautiful woman. Easy does it. Just get it down there. This stuff's stuck perfectly, and it's not super thick veneer. I don't have any bubbles. One bubble right there. So I'll come back tomorrow. You won't know, but I will, and I'll take my. Actually, I could just shove a little glue in there right now and throw a clamp on it overnight and call it a day. Wax on, wax off. Yeah, just what we need. Go wax your legs, buddy. We had a great time at the Long Island Woodworkers over the weekend. They had a show at the Cradle of Aviation Museum. The weekend before, I was down at the Howard County Woodworkers in Columbia, Maryland, and we had a killer time down there too. The great thing about going out and visiting these different clubs in different areas, I just get to meet a ton of really great people. So thanks to both clubs for hosting me the last 2 weekends. It was fun. I'm exhausted, but it was fun. Just having a lot of fun. And in a week and a half, I guess, I will be at the Hearn Hardwoods open house. No matter where you are, Hearn Hardwoods is definitely worth the trip to see the place. They have some amazing lumber, and it's an unreal facility. Just the saws in the sawmills are just outrageously huge. They have material that matches it. I mean, last year they were sawing up a log that was probably 6 feet, 7 feet. The planks coming off it were 6 or 7 feet wide and about 20 feet long. They can do something they can do 8 or 9 feet by about 40 feet long. It's crazy. And there's lots of music. Rick Hearn, who I've known for a long time, good friend, is into guitars and music and stuff. So there are world-class musicians going to be there, lots of good food, and just like going to these woodworking clubs, massive numbers of really good people. And there's tons of raffles, and all the proceeds go to Habitat for Humanity. So if you are within even 3 or 4 hours of driving time, 8 hours, whatever however far you are, it's worth going because the place is amazing. And it's next Friday and Saturday. I don't know what the dates are. I don't even know what date it is today. I think it's the 16th. So it's somewhere around the whatever that Friday, Saturday is, around the 25th, 26th, 27th. So it's Friday and Saturday. Lee Nielsen's even coming, plus a lot of other really great exhibitors. So come on down. It's free to get in. You can roam around, say hello if you stop by. It's tons of fun. So then at some point I'll be out at the Rochester Woodworkers doing something out there, and I don't know what else in between. So if you have a woodworking club that's looking to do something, have them contact me. We can talk, see if we can't get something together. So if you guys are all, yes, Vincent, I will be doing demos at Hearn Hardwoods. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do. I put a lot of stuff together in the last few weeks for the 2 clubs that I went to last weekend and then again this weekend. I'm probably just going to pull something out of those demos to do down there at Hearn's, simply because I've already got the stuff prepped. And we'll go from there. And it's fresh in my mind, so I don't have to go over anything again. If we've gone an hour and 10 minutes, I thought I was going to get out of this quick and easy because this is such an easy method of putting veneer down. So if you really, honestly, if you've never tried hammer veneering before, it's definitely worth it. it's easy. It is if you're having a lot of trouble with it, most likely you've either thinned out your glue too much or you've overworked the surface too much. If you're really hammering, really pushing down on that hammer, you might have a problem. I've never pushed down on it that hard. I know somebody was saying that. Next weekend, yes, whatever next, not this coming weekend, not this Friday, Saturday, but a week and a half from today, roughly. So I guess this Friday is 19, so it's 26 and 27, if that's Friday, September, because you may not be watching this. Somebody may be watching this 6 months from now and go, hey, I'm going to Hearns next weekend, and find out that there's no open house. So it's September of 2025, and it's, either the 25th and 26th or the 26th, 27th, whatever that is, next Friday. So thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. If you guys don't have any other questions, I'm going to call it a night. It's been a long day. I do appreciate you coming out, as always. Next week, I want to do some planer tips. We did the joiner really early on, and I think I want to go and do some planer tips next week. If I change my mind, because I have a couple other things that I was thinking about, if I change my mind, you'll find out about it in the email that no one got. So we'll find out what's happening there. Because now there's a handful of people who are saying they didn't get the emails. Check your spam folders just in case. I don't know why that would cause a problem, but we'll find out. If not, I will see you next week. Thanks again for coming out. Please, if you're watching this post show on YouTube, like this video, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to ring that notification bell, because you really don't want to miss this. I'll see everyone next week. Thanks for coming.